Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Neuralizer channel for yet another show. This time, we are not going to be discussing football, sports, 49ers, anything related to those topics. This is not a practice squad episode. This is something entirely different. Today, I have uh, two people here with me to discuss our common upbringing as kids. We were both raised under the same house. I have Everett and Katherine here. If you guys want to say hello.
Hello.
Hi.
So, this, as I said, this video is not related to the practice squad in any way, and I've always envisioned that this channel would include some spiritual and theological content. I have not gotten there quite yet. It's been mainly focused on sports so far. But the way that that is connected to what we're going to be discussing today is that the specific topic for us today is how we would describe each of our religious upbringings. So this isn't just a generic discussion about how everything that happened when we were kids, but rather specifically the religious influences in our lives, what things did influence us, what people influenced us, what content influenced us, etc., and to discuss that and try to understand each other a little bit better and learn more about where the other people are coming from. This is also an opportunity for uh, each of us to share related anything regarding conflicts that have occurred or things that they just want to get off their chest in discussing this topic. So, um, unless you guys want to addend anything to that, then I'm going to go ahead and dive us right into the discussion. Are you guys okay with that intro?
That's good.
Okay.
Yeah.
So our main question for discussion today is how would you describe your religious upbringing? So I thought it would be good if we could just each take a turn and kind of just briefly go through in our own way how we would answer that question, and then I'm assuming a discussion will likely ensue from there. But it would be good for each of us to have an uninterrupted opportunity to answer the question: how would you describe your religious upbringing? Would either of you like to go first? If you don't say, I'm
Uh,
going to pick somebody. So, Everett, do you want to start?
uh, yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
I think that um, just I would say briefly from a terminology perspective, what I when I in my definition, there's theology and there's religion, and theology is beliefs about the paranormal, and religion is the institutionalized expression of those beliefs. So when you talk about religious upbringing, um, for a person theoretically that could be something that's largely theological but not very religious, or something that's very religious but not very theological. I think for me, the two are it's a lot of both, and the two are pretty fully intertwined. uh I I would the two just giants in terms of religious institutions of my childhood are Peninsula Bible Church Cupertino and Paideia Christians, and those are where we went to church, and where we went to school for the I guess in my case the bulk of my childhood, and I think for you guys the entirety of your childhood. Um, and I would describe those both as um, uh, very strongly Protestant, specifically in the non-denominational evangelical branch of Protestantism, and I think the both of those molded me quite a bit. Is that the type of answer you were looking for, Jeremy?
Sure. Yeah, I'm not.
Okay,
I don't want to put you into a mold. So if that's
sure.
what you want to say, that's fine. I- So it sounds like,
Yeah,
yeah. Is there
yeah.
anything more, or is there any more detail that you want to offer on that, or do
No,
you want
I
to?
would just, I guess, going back to my original distinction, I would just say that they both had a great religious impact in the sense that they were institutions in which I spent a lot of time, and that presence in those institutions had a lot of impact on me, and they were also theologically impactful in that they impacted my beliefs a lot.
Okay. Okay. So I imagine then that both PBC and Paideia Christian School will be topics that we'll discuss later once Catherine and I have had a chance to answer the question.
I would imagine so.
Yeah, I would as well. So Catherine, do you wanna go ahead and give your answer to that question?
Sure. I don't actually think I have a lot to add on since, from an institutional standpoint, those are the two that I interacted with the most growing up. I would say my maybe theological understanding, or at least my own independent understanding. I don't remember a whole lot prior to maybe eighth grade, maybe seventh grade. Not that I don't remember things, but I think actually beginning to articulate things myself or apply my own rational thought to it probably starts around seventh grade ish. Um, but yes, other there were certainly more influences as an adult. I'm sure we'll talk about this more, but I grew up Protestant and then converted to Catholicism as an adult, but that was an adult choice, so unrelated to how I grew up.
Okay. Okay. Um, so yeah, for me, I would say that uh, I would agree with the things Everett said as far as being significant influences. And the church that we attended, as well as the school program that we experienced, were both things that are responsible for a significant percentage of my uh, life period, and then especially my religious upbringing, the religious upbringing aspect of my life. So um, I think there's lots of other smaller things that contribute uh, to my upbringing, but I mean, for me specifically, I am also in the same camp as Catherine, that I don't. I have a fairly fuzzy memory of myself at a younger age. I think until I hit middle school time frame, that was when things started to feel like they were more real for me. And I mean, when I say real, I mean that I was starting to be aware of my choices and what some of these religious terms really meant, and what I actually believed, and how I wanted to act on those things. And then it wasn't actually until I turned um, 17 that I really fully committed myself to Christianity. So I that's something that we can also discuss as well, since I actually don't know if either of you know that. But so that does play somewhat of a role for me. And unlike the two of you, I have not uh, experienced a conversion. So I'm still probably, my views are probably more closely related to the things that we were taught as children than the views that either of you hold now. Um, so yeah, okay. So now that we've had kind of an answer opportunity to answer that question, where do we want to take it from here? Do we want to talk about Everett? You had sent out some bullet points, some
Hmm.
different things we could go down that route. We could also talk about PBC or the homeschooling. And if it wasn't clear for
Yeah.
anybody that is listening or will be listening, um, Paideia Christian School is the official name for the homeschool that we had growing up. So that when you said that, Everett, I kind of snickered a little bit because I haven't heard or used those words in a very long time. So that's not something I ever advertised, frankly, that the name of our school. That was something that I actually avoided advertising because it just then I had to I always was trying to prepare myself for follow-up questions about, oh, what school is that, where is it, how many people go there, etc., and which would just inevitably lead to awkward answers. So I usually just told people I was homeschooled. Okay.
I just have to throw in here, just because, this is public, that we're going to discuss homeschooling, but as far as I am concerned, as an attorney, I have an understanding of an appreciation for fundamental parental rights, and I share some concern about government regulation, but I have grave concerns about homeschooling. So none of what we talk about should be taken as me expressing an opinion on whether or not homeschooling is a good, or any opinion on homeschooling.
Oh, okay.
I just wanted
Okay.
to throw that out there.
I may offer opinions on some things. I don't think I don't think I'm going to come down and say homeschooling 6 out of 10. I don't think I'm going to do that today.
Yeah, I'm actually. I'm glad to hear what Katherine just said, and if we were to get into more depth, there's certain ironies, as opposed to us agreeing on that issue at this juncture. But yeah, I don't anticipate, or maybe, unless maybe the conversation will go in a direction where we sort of talk about educate. Well, actually, I could see scenarios where we talk about sort of educational structure as something we talk about a bit, but. Yes, I wouldn't. Any description of my own experience is not necessarily something I would recommend as curriculum for a young kid today, either.
Sure.
But sorry, Jim. I think I cut you off from.
No. I intend this to be kind of an open discussion period. So maybe we need to have the boat pushed down Splash Mountain a little bit more so that we can get going. Do we want to talk about the things you sent, Everett? Do we want to talk a little bit about PBC maybe, or what?
Could I say something a little bit about age?
Sure.
Because I think something you said was very interesting, where you said you emphasized your middle school and later years. And I think that's something where developmentally we're going to be we were different, because for me, some of my strongest, and this would be a more theological development, occurred when I was very young, like when I was 3 and 4. And I specifically remember, one of my more memorable moments as a young kid. And I'm trying to. I hope I get this right, but um, I I was very captivated as a very little kid by Moses. And I would, if I remember, okay, this is the part where maybe this is the little kid memory not working out right, but the way I remember it is that one year we got a Christmas tree, and the Christmas tree came home wrapped in a sort of a net, to ease with transportation, and then we cut open the net, and the branches came out, and so there was this wad of white net that was laying around, and so I stuck it in my mouth, and then had it dangle out the front of my mouth because that looks like a long white beard, and then I took a stick and I walked around in the backyard pretending to be Moses. And I also I drew. I think I still have. I think I still have some of them. I drew a whole. I would take a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, And what I would do, I did this with Star Wars. I did this with well, this with mainly Star Wars and Moses. I would take a 8.5 sheet of paper, and I would divide it into sixths. So one down the middle, and then two across, and then it would be something like a comic book of 6 pictures, and then I would take a bunch of those, divide it up into sixths, and then I have this little collection of stories of Moses, pretty much through sort of his birth through, you know, somewhere around Sinai. And so I drew in crayon, and I did a lot of that when I was little. Um, and so that and that was very vivid for me. And that act, right, this the sticking the net in my mouth, like that was this very immersive experience for me. Um, and uh and so some of my earliest memories in terms of theological formation are that. And I think that's stuck with me a lot. It was very those experiences were very real in my mind.
Do you happen to remember why, or maybe this was something that you realized um, in hindsight, why Moses was such a appealing or recognizable figure for you at that age?
I I think he was just um uh to use to use a phrase that I don't use, but I would probably resonate with other people, and that it didn't resonate with me now or then, but I guess it sort of fits here. Is Moses was a badass. Like he had this, and this is and this is informed, and this is actually important because I didn't read then, right? This is pre me being able to read. So the main influence on me was Superbook, um, which and let me just can I just pause to discuss Superbook for just a moment?
Go for it.
Superbook is I think it is a Jerry Falwell backed project. I think I may be wrong
Mm.
about that, but it was a an effort, that and I did not know this at the time, but it was mainly a effort at American Christian evangelism in Japan. And so they used sort of their anime influenced cartoon art to bring Christian stories to the Japanese media market. And so there's lots of cartoons of these various stories, and then the hook of it is that there's this little kid Chris and neighbor Joy, and then their friendly robot toy Gizmo, who go back in time through a Bible that Chris keeps. The Bible, it speaks, and it sucks every couple of weeks. It sucks the three of them in, and then they go back in time and they have this adventure in the story, and then that's the cartoon. And so I watched that a lot um, when I was little, and I think of all of the characters, Moses. I mean, he had a staff, had a beard, which, and for me, when I was little, like long beard, and this was from Superbook, like he very much like the image, that sort of archetypal typal image of like a strong older man with a long white beard was very viscerally compelling to me. And so he had that, he had the staff, he had superpowers, he led a bunch of people, right? He wielded a lot of political power. Um, he killed a bunch of people, like which I don't know if that part was appealing, but it sort of showed his power. And so the idea of reenacting him in the backyard, that just fit with me very, very naturally, I guess.
Okay, so it sounds like it mainly came from Superbook. You kind of created an image of him from Superbook, and then that's sort of what drove the main influence.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And actually, sorry, to the point that I did it once at Grandma and Grandpa's, and I dressed up, and a uh, they had those large screen doors toward the back patio, and because they'd had that burglary, and they were very concerned about it. They had a stick that they put into the along the base of
The sliding
uh
door so that you couldn't
yeah,
open it.
yeah. And so I used that when I was over there. That would be Moses's staff. And so I dressed up and used their security stick thing. And I remember once Grandma took took the trouble. I don't think anyone had ever done this before. That all right. Well, if we're gonna do this, I'm gonna actually pull out Genesis, the book known as Genesis, and I'm going to read. We're going to do a full read along as you reenact it. And so she did. And there was a whole bunch of detail in there that was not in Superbook. I remember I just remember, oh, okay, all right. There's more detail here, and so we did. She did this whole read along, and I was doing the thing, and we went through a whole bunch of plague. Well, we didn't do the full like. I think we basically did the Exodus. Oh yeah, so sorry, I said Genesis. I guess it would be Exodus.
Mm-hmm.
We did the Exodus, and we went through a bunch of plagues and the whole where Moses is allowed to partially escape, but then is recalled. That part's not in Superbook, so we had to do he goes out some, then he's recalled, and that was an addition to the story. So yeah, so that was actually a moment in which the actual text sort of introduced into the Superbook experience. But I think for me, viscerally, it was actually the Superbook experience that had sort of the experiential primacy for me.
Sure. Okay. Okay. Um, so now I can't even remember how did we get off talking about I remember you said you had mentioned Moses, and then we got started talking about Superbook, but
it was an addendum on age.
Oh, that's
You
right.
and I
Right,
had
right.
said, yeah.
Right. Okay, so you remember, and how old were you, Everett, when this happened? The Christmas tree beard.
I was probably about 3 or 4.
Okay, so very young.
Three, right around 3 or 4.
Okay.
Meaning you and I wouldn't have been born, or I would have
Right.
been a tiny.
Yeah, that would.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't have been born. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So. Yeah, I guess actually, so for our listeners, I am 30. I'm going to be turning 31 in August. Katherine, you are 34. Correct?
Am I no?
Wait, no, you're sorry,
I'm
you're 33. You turned 33.
Oh my gosh!
You turned 33 a few months before I turned 31. You're about 2.5 years older than me, and then Everett, you are almost 7. No, you are 7 years older than me. 7 years and a month, I think. Is that right?
Well, 6. I mean, I'm 30. I'm 36. I'm about to turn 37.
Right, but you turn.
I will be 37 in 2 months.
Right, and then I turn. Oh, that's right. Then I turn 31. So yeah, you're. It's about 6 years.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, just so people understand the age differential and references. Okay.
Because for those who don't know, you were my kindergarten orientation came a couple hours prior to your water breaking. So
exciting.
yeah.
um, okay, so uh, where do we want to go from here? It, again, Everett, you did list out some of these. I guess I can just read these out because these are things that you said were influences for you. You listed John Bunyan, the Lord's Army, Bob Jones University, the Pathway Readers, Billy Graham, Azusa Pacific University. So
Mhm.
I can take a crack at this because I think my response to this list is going to be fairly short. So um I I don't have any comment about John Bunyan. Frankly, I don't that doesn't ring any bells for me as far as growing up or having any influence on anything meaningful for me. Um,
I'm
the
turning around to the bookcase behind me here. Please continue.
okay, well, you're not on video on YouTube, so you could be
Okay. Yeah.
doing a lot of things and no one would know. Uh,
Mhm.
so the Lord's Army. I also don't really have any recollection of on this having any sort of influence. And I guess when I say I'm going to take a crack at this, the question I'm answering is: did any of these things have an influence on my religious upbringing, or do I were they a part of my religious upbringing in some way that I remember in any kind of meaningful way? And for the answer for those first two is no. The third one, Bob Jones University. So I do remember we did have some assigned reading for, it was at least for history, possibly one or two other subjects. And I think several of those books were books that we all read. Uh,
Oh yeah,
oh,
I
is that
forgot
Pilgrim's
about that.
Progress?
Yes.
Okay.
For those listening, Everett just held up a highly illustrated book of Pilgrim's Progress to the camera.
Yes. With
Oh, I remember
fantastic
the
art,
audio.
fantastic art.
Yeah,
Oh,
fantastic art. Yeah.
you still have that? I didn't know you owned that.
There's actually, I think, two, and one of them came to me.
Oh,
The other may be in Los Gatos. But
Okay, so then I'll amend my answer a little bit. I do remember Pilgrim's Progress. I remember some of the pictures. That honestly, I haven't read Pilgrim's Progress since I was a kid. So that wasn't something that particularly had a huge influence on my uh, religious beliefs. I don't think, or at least not now in any way.
Mhm.
Um, it probably helped shape or give image to certain concepts when I was a kid. Um,
Mhm.
like the idea of him bearing a burden, uh, and encountering various challenges in his life, like that probably put the Christian walk or the faith walk in perspective a little bit as a kid, but I don't even know if I would have been able to use the terms I just used as a kid. So again, it's just as a kid that the images help create something to help you understand. So the Bob Jones University, Everett's showing us more art of a judge who has a large belly sitting out on top of his desk. Not Everett, but the judge. Um, so yeah, Bob Jones. Was there? Can you guys help me remember? Was there anything other than the history book that we read that
Well,
was from BJU?
Jeremy, can I ask a question about sort of structure of this?
Sure.
Are we going to go through like each one of our experiences of all six? Because I would prefer that we all just discuss one at a time.
yeah, I think
Oh,
that's a
sure.
better
Yeah, we
idea.
can do that.
Yeah,
Totally.
'cause
Yeah.
I think I
Okay.
have more to say than Jeremy on some of these,
I
especially on Bob
imagine that
Jones
you
University.
you probably do. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's rewind then.
Yeah. And Jeremy,
Apologies on my end. Let's rewind back to John Bunyan then.
okay.
So I called Paul Bunyan this morning by accident.
Paul.
Joe was very confused.
Who's Paul Bunyan?
Isn't that the guy with the axe and the mule?
Yes.
Yeah,
Ox,
very
yeah.
different. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways,
how many famous Bunyans are there? Okay, so that's my answer for John Bunyan. So you guys, why don't you guys take your turn for that?
And Jeremy, if I could say, the list that I provided there is when I was writing that, it's not just influences generally. To me, that was specifically anti-Roman Catholic childhood influence. If or at least that sort of aired in that direction
S-
for me.
okay. I mean, I guess that's so. I guess there's a couple layers to that that may be useful to point out. So, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the phase in my life where I encountered Pilgrim's Progress, which I think is my
Mhm.
only experience of anything having to do with John Bunyan, that I would not have understood how anything from Pilgrim's Progress fit within the broader context of a Christian denomination. So, and because I didn't dive that deep into Pilgrim's Progress really at any point in my life besides reading it through a couple times and having it read to me a few times, I wouldn't say that it really had much influence on me at all.
Mhm. Well, could I? Well, sorry, Kevin. I've talked a lot. Kevin, go ahead.
Well, let me just, I don't have a whole ton to say on this. So I don't know if we ever had it actually read out loud to us. There was an audio, like, narrative, I think maybe by Focus on the Family, because I mentioned it to Joe and Joe was like, oh, I think we had one by Focus on the Family. So I wouldn't be surprised. Um, and that was very highly dramatized and in that book. And in my memory, we listened to the audio recording like 2,000 times, which is probably not correct. But in my head, that's how often we listened to it. And for me, it was at a very young age. I don't think I've ever read the real thing, certainly not as an adult. I did not know it was anti Catholic. I mean, I think I knew it was Protestant, so kind of hence not Catholic, but I don't remember enough. There's kind of certain very poignant things, um, some of which I kind of am surprised that we were allowed to listen to as a child because some of it was quite violent. Um, but so I remember the stories as a kid. Every once in a while, one of the images will pop into my head. Um, but that's pretty much it. I have not digested it as an adult by any means.
I- So my memory is that we went through a John Bunyan phase. Like there were like growing up, there were influences that kind of came and went, or there were influences that would come and then we'd sort of exhaust them and then lose interest in them and move on. Like we went through by way of another example, we went through a Phantom of the Opera phase at one
I
point.
remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. And
That was a
so
nice space.
I remember we had it was maybe about a year where we had a real John Bunyan phase. We listened to Pilgrim's Progress, the audiobook. Um,
More than once?
well,
In
but
the
if I remember right, we listened to maybe more than once. We listened to it at lunch because at that time there was a common practice of listening to educational audio tapes during lunch in the kitchen. But we listened to that, and then we listened to the sequel. Um, and I'm going blank here. What is the sequel called? With is it Christiana, his
Is
wife?
it Pilgrim's Regress?
I hope no. Is it called Pilgrim's
I
Regress?
thought that was his sequel. I don't know. Did he
I
write
mean,
another book?
that doesn't sound
It, if so, it's very much the opposite of the actual content
Well,
of the
sure, because
sequel.
they
But
follow along.
um, uh, it
well,
uh,
there is a book called Pilgrim's Progress 2 Christiana's Story.
yeah, I get maybe it's just called Christiana's Story. So I think we did a full dive into basically whatever was available. We got there were two animated books, one of which is this one, animated by um we should give this author credit. We should give the illustrator credit here if I can find his name because I, I, I I dare say that guy was fairly formative in our childhoods. I would think we laughed at his work, but there was one animated book. This book. Then there was another. There was a bit more of a sort of a graphic novel. Um, that I don't think I have that one. That one may still be in Los Gatos. Um, but and then we listened to audio of uh of Pilgrim's Progress, and I think also of Christiana's Story.
Mhm.
And then the graphic novel type one was a combination of a graphic novel of Pilgrim's Progress and Christiana's Story. So we
Mm.
very much um we went through all of that content. Like, there's just a period of time where we just got or well, not we were given as much um uh uh you know dramatized content of John Bunyan's work as could be found, and we were given that pretty much, all at once. And there was that was very much a point of discussion at the time. So that part of the significance of that is whenever that was, right? I There is a 6-year gap between Jeremy and I at that moment in time. So I think our ages were such that I guess it does make some sense that our sort of experience of it would be different.
Yeah, I don't honestly don't remember most of these other things. I remember the picture book and I remember some of the pictures because it does have very memorable art in it, but I don't
Yeah.
really have much of a memory of it beyond that.
Um,
Side note: Pilgrim's Regress apparently is a book by C.S. Lewis, so it is a thing,
Oh,
but
it's okay.
unrelated.
it's a book by him.
Yeah, I've never even. I didn't.
I don't think I've
Okay.
heard of that
Yeah, I don't know.
before.
I don't know what it's about, but yeah.
I didn't know there was a. Okay. I'm a little surprised there's an actual book by him that I didn't know the name of. I know
Yeah,
I've not read
same.
all of his books.
I agree.
But,
Yeah, I thought I
Yeah.
had no. I thought I knew all of C.S. Lewis's books, but
um, but so for me, what really stood out, and this may be the experiential difference between Jeremy and I, is throughout our John Bunyan phase, it was very important um, that John Bunyan, and this was present on my mind throughout this, was incarcerated for a significant portion of his life. He was born in 1620. Now I'm just reading off. This is not stuff I necessarily knew at the time, but he was born in 1628. He was died in 1688. Actually died of natural causes, which I just found out from reading this. I think if I had would have guessed, I would have said he was martyred, but he was not martyred. He was just incarcerated for a number. But he was very much persecuted for his um, for his beliefs. And this is where we get into some nuance about exactly what he was and which faction was around the Reformation, which faction was persecuting who, and who was sympathetic to who. But for as a child, I do very distinctly remember, look at this great guy. He's done this very rich body of work that's very edifying for us, and is this wonderful insight into Christianity. And look what they did to him. They threw him in jail, and they are the bad guys, right? Um, and so that was, for me, that was an important thread of the whole of the whole John Bunyan phase. So, and I think in general, my understanding of his work is what I would say is pretty Protestant. And again, it's been a long time since I've read his work, but um, it's in my mind, when I think of Protestantism, I think the journey of Christian and Christiana feels Protestant to me in my memory of it. Anyway, sorry, I'm sort of babbling now. I'll yield the floor.
I don't honestly, I don't remember. I only remember bits and pieces of the story, so I wouldn't even be able to comment on that part of it. If it stands as sort of an exclusively Protestant story, or if there's anti one denomination or another content in there, I don't know.
Well, the main thing, I would say that the main thing is there is no institutionalized church. And in fact, going back to my original distinction, the story is very a-religious, because he meets a guy, I think named Preacher, in a field, and then goes on this journey. And Christian has very little actual institutionalized experience. There's little bits and pieces here and there, but he's on a journey to some extent by himself. Sometimes he has companions, but there's this tremendous downplaying of institutional involvement in the story, which to me rings Protestant.
Okay.
Interesting. That makes sense.
Yeah, I can see that. Okay, Catherine, did you have any other comments on the John Bunyan part?
No.
No?
Mm-mm.
Okay. So what about the Lord's Army? I think I kind of already gave my answer on this too. I don't recall. Everett, you do tend to have a better memory than me, so maybe if you went first, I may remember some things.
I'm actually I was on that one. I was actually expecting of the three of us, Catherine, to have the best memory.
So I'm gonna be honest. I had to Google it because I didn't. It rang like that phrase rings a bell, but I don't know what it is. And according to Wikipedia, it doesn't exist. And it's similar. Well, no, that is. I couldn't find a Wikipedia entry. I didn't spend that much time looking, but according to Wikipedia, it led to two different pages. One was like maybe the Army of the Lord, and then something else, a movement in Romania. And I was like, well, is this related to whatever religious group in Romania PBC had a relationship with? Because I certainly remember that. Oh, okay. Okay. Then I do remember that.
Do you want to talk about? Yes. Yeah. We're talking about Romania. Yes.
So again, I was very young, so I remember I had a pen pal over there. And I remember Dad going on mission
Janina
trips.
Boji, right?
Yeah. And I was trying to think. I want to say the last time he went, I was like 9. So I don't think I had really an understanding. I remember that there was persecution over there, so there was some concern about safety. I don't think I had an understanding of what was really going on. And I think I have a lot more developed thoughts about churches having relationships with churches in other countries and well, a lot of things about, kind of relationships internationally. Hold on, I need to close the doors to the office, but I don't remember a whole lot, to be honest. Yeah.
Jeremy, should I say a bit more?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So
Catherine's back.
I'm back.
Yeah. So actually, can I pause here and because I think I may be burying the lead here on something that probably would be more helpful to say up front, which is that for me, when in childhood, when my experience of Protestantism and Roman Catholicism is to a significant degree one of violence. So not the personal experience of violence, but a lot of when I think about when I was exposed to Protestantism and Roman Catholicism as a child, and by me, I think I mean, not saying just me, it's probably we, but I'll just say me, was often in the context of violence. And so I think just sort of for me, if I do sort of like a little word association, if someone says Protestant Roman Catholic to me, probably one of the first next words that comes to my mind is violence. And so that I'm trying to, but when I made that list, I was sort of trying to draw out that connection in me. And so thus, for a good portion of that list, Protestant Roman Catholic violence, starting with the incarceration of John Bunyan, and then continuing to this now, is so these are also bits and pieces of it. So the although actually, spoiler alert, Roman Catholics are not actually going to figure very prominently here. Although I think that these are going to be grievances by Protestants against the Eastern Orthodox. But um, when so as as I understand, and this I don't know a lot about Eastern European history. I'll say that up front. This is going to be my childhood impressions of it, which are a experience as reality thing. I'm not here to get an actual authoritative voice on Eastern European history, but as I understand it, when when the Soviet Union collapsed, Romania and Moldova, amongst a bunch of other countries, became independent countries. And in the case of Romania, a sort of pro-communist dictator, is it Nicolae Ceausescu? I think was his name. Stayed around for a while longer until ultimately he and his wife were publicly executed. And um, in the aftermath, around that time, there was a um, let's start off by calling them Christian resistance movement um, that was working underground and was actively um, undergoing persecution and incarceration. And I remember one of their leaders. We were told the story of he was a poet, and this is probably a famous name that people would recognize. I don't recall the name. He would he would in jail. He would I think I remember the story I remember being told as a kid is he take while in jail he would take soap and he would take foam on the mirror in the jail bathroom or whatever, and he would write his poems. He would just scratch out the poems out of the soap residue on the mirror, and then he would memorize and theoretically memorize this whole body of work that he was working on. So he was this persecuted, incarcerated Christian, and all of that became relevant to us because PBCC, under the leadership uh, of Brian Morgan, who was our pastor at the time, and then with the assistance of other people, including Steve DePanger, um, went over there from the United States to help prop up the the Christian resistance faction. And as Ceausescu collapsed and the um, the that faction became more politically free, there was easier movement back and forth. But I believe that Brian in some of his earlier trips, like he was at like he had to take some security precautions when he was over there, kind of thing. I don't know if he was ever in super danger, but it was a thing that was known that yeah, he's needing to take some steps. Um, and all and so PBCC was propping up that persecuted faction, and as I recall, throughout that whole experience, that was in contrast to the more institutionalized Romanian Orthodox Church, which was viewed in our circles as those were the Christians who, those were the bad Christians. Those were the ones who had sold out to the communists and who had, they were allowed to maintain sort of a facade of their thing if they towed the government line, as opposed to the real Christians who were underground. And that conflict was where, and PBC was there at the rub of that conflict. And so Steve went over there twice, one in 96, once in 97 for a couple. I know one was 96, and then it was 97 or 98 for a couple weeks. And did a bunch of, honestly, I don't remember all of what he did, but he was there to assist this and oh, sorry, I'm sorry, bearing the lead again. That faction was called the Lord's Army. And so he was there assisting the Lord's Army in whatever they needed. Probably a variety of different things that they. But they were there providing that, and so for me, that was the one. Like, yeah, we read about, like, for John Bunyan, we were reading about him and his life, but that was the one exposure I actually had of, like, the real deal. This is Christians killing Christians, incarcerating Christians for being other Christians. Like, that was the real frontline exposure we had to that. And so that was formative for me, even though I was not super involved in it. He was certainly, Steve would be gone on trips. The other members of the PBC's delegation um, would be gone. And that was David Jones, Marty Brill, other people that I knew um, would be gone on that trip. Oh, what's his name? Walt McHuston, who his focus was more on the Moldova side than the Romania side, but he would go over too. And so that was, I think for me that was important. And then we had personal relationships as well. There were people that came over. I remember there was a guy who came over. We hosted him for dinner at our home. And he had been one of the resistance leaders. There was someone lived with the Landgrafs for an extended period of time. Came over, sort of an exchange program, and lived with them for several months. I don't recall that person's name. But anyway, for me that was, um, and then Catherine, you had your pen pal thing, and so that for me was it formative first in several ways, but one of them was that sort of frontline exposure to Christian factional conflict. Sorry, I'm babbling on here. I'll yield the floor.
Okay, yeah, this is another example of something that, I mean, my memory really just, I remember more about this than Pilgrim's Progress stuff. I think I remember Dad going to Romania. I remember the family that had I think a couple of daughters that visited us a couple of times. I don't remember their names, but they were a family that Dad had met over there and that came and visited us. I want to say at least twice.
Yeah, that's coming back to me now, vaguely. Yeah.
But I don't remember other. I think in my head I thought, Dad's over there, meeting people, and I think maybe I thought he was helping out with a church or something over there. I don't think I had a very concrete understanding at the time of what Dad was actually doing there,
Mm-hmm.
other than that he went with PBC people.
Everett were there. My vague recollection is I would have said they were persecuted by a communist government. If I'd
Mhm.
had to make a guess, that's vaguely in my recollection. I don't remember conversations about Catholics
It's
or
not.
Eastern Orthodox.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's Eastern Orthodox.
okay.
It's not Catholics. Yeah.
Um, like Eastern Orthodox, like within the okay, um, because there's Eastern Orthodox that are in line with the church that are recognized by the Catholic Church,
Mhm.
and then there are ones that aren't. But
I think there's the Romanian Orthodox Church, I believe, is an entity.
okay, because sometimes you can have a name tacked on and it's still recognized by the Catholic Church, sometimes not. But anyway, regardless,
I don't know. Yeah,
was there?
the extent the extent of the relations between the other faction and Rome at that time, I don't know.
So my question is, do you remember as were there conversations with you in the house about that dynamic? About the dynamic of we're talking about Christians killing other Christians. Was that discussed or like broken down for you at all?
To to some degree, yes. But and again, I think that they would say that they're not that the other. It wouldn't have been told to me as it's Christians. It would be fake Christians killing the real Christians. Is how it would have been framed to me. But I remember having some understanding of. I remember having some appreciation of the fact that it's not like the Soviets. The Soviets didn't wipe out Christian, like they didn't go through and tear down all the churches. They co-opted, and this is and again, I'm not the expert on history here, but it was not just like the Soviets never systematically went through and destroyed all of Christian infrastructure and iconography throughout the Soviet Union. They co-opted it for their own use to some extent, or to varying degrees of extent. Was so um so there there being, I mean, the main thing I just remember is the good guys are being persecuted,
Right.
right? And Brian Morgan is in trouble, or at least right to some extent.
Right.
Um, and we're rebuilding, uh, but and again, and it is fuzzy. Like this, you're asking a level of detail that is somewhat fuzzy to me, but
Sure, sure.
but it's a reclaiming of. I do remember it was because I knew, like, back in the day, right, the land of Romania would have been an epicenter of Christianity. So it's that the real Christians were pushed underground. The rest of society is still there, and then it's the underground Christians are then post Ceausescu is they're coming back and trying to um, be the uh, well, be the remnant to to use uh, to use the Hebrew terminology. Does
Okay.
that answer your question? And it's only a fragmentary answer, I know.
Yeah.
Okay. But I do maybe this is like I think I was definitely aware that our people, they weren't getting to use the nice churches, they weren't getting to use the big building. They were having to meet quietly in these homes and do this. So they were divested of the historically Christian infrastructure that was their entitlement, to some degree, that they had lost access to.
Okay.
Yeah. Because what you're getting into is what do you do when you have children and you're talking about an enemy? Like that's
Sure.
a very difficult, dangerous topic because once you set up someone as an enemy, a kid understands that basic concept, but I mean, that's you have to be really careful about that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right.
And
It
would you
carries
guys agree that
deep
like,
consequences.
I mean, for you guys, was the Romanian government bad when you guys were little kids?
That's a good question. I
Something there was there earlier. Okay, go for it, Jeremy.
I was just gonna say I think I thought someone was bad, um, but I don't know if it was the government or I guess it was probably the government because I don't remember thinking that there were other religious people that were persecuting other people. I think in my head I had a picture painted of like the government didn't want Christians in Romania meeting and spreading Christianity or something like that.
And again, it's it is fuzzy for me, and I want to be honest about that it's been a long time. And also some of this, the way human memory works, we sort of stack things together. So like obviously I've done a bit of reading about Romania in the 25 years since. And so it is hard to entangle exactly when I learned what.
Sure.
But uh, I'm trying to recount it as best as I can there.
Okay. Um, so do we want to move on to the next one or so as far as time, so we've been going for about an hour. I do we want to maybe cover one more and then take a pause?
Yeah, I think that's fine. I mean, if that's what you want to do, and then we can conclude this episode, and that's perfectly fine.
Okay, it sounds like
Yep, that works for me.
it may be useful to do something more later, but we can talk about that offline, obviously. Okay, so let's talk about the next one, which is Bob Jones University. Um, so
Do I get to start, or Jeremy? Do you actually have stuff on this one? Because if
why
you
don't
do,
you,
you
so
should
this
talk.
is going to be another example of where I remember the further we go down on this list, the more I remember. I think, or maybe not quite, but now that we're past the first two, which I basically didn't remember at all, the next four are things that I remember more about. But I think if you guys probably will remember more than I did, and so if you go first, that might help jog my memory a little bit. So, Catherine, do you want to go first on this one?
Sure.
You have
I'm
the
go-
privilege of going
I,
first.
I'm still here. I'm going to be out of frame for a second, but I'm still here and listening.
Okay.
So the only interaction I know of that I had with Bob Jones University growing up was a history textbook, which I believe I used in 8th grade. And I have a distinct memory of reading a passage. So I think this is in 8th grade, so I would have been about 13. That was extremely anti-Catholic. Not simply just here's some Protestant theology. It was extremely anti-Catholic. And I don't know what time in history it was describing. I don't remember. But I read the passage and I just remember thinking being really bothered by it. And I didn't know much about Catholicism growing up. So I don't think it was oh, well, I know this is wrong. I can refute this. It was something is just wrong with this. And I think I talked to dad. I don't remember, but it really bothered me. And I don't remember what he said. And I think it probably was either so hateful or so illogical, or maybe both, that I think even as a 13-year-old, it stood out to me as this is clearly biased, clearly untrue, clearly propaganda, something of that nature. And so I did not start exploring Catholicism until I was in college. So we're talking years later. This was not oh, my first step toward Catholicism already started and I was kind of like on the defensive. No, it was just, I think a 13-year-old, excuse my language, could see through the BS of this textbook that it was, a biased, whatever it was. So
And
I remember that like very clearly. I don't remember anything else about that textbook at
was it
all.
a history textbook?
I think so. I think it was maybe a world history textbook. That would make
Okay.
sense with Catholicism because
I remember
you probably wouldn't see that in the US
a
one.
white kind of long rectangular book. Like
Yeah, like an
it was
off-white background.
yeah, it wasn't the traditional portrait sized book. It was more like a landscape sized book that was white and had a history textbook.
And I just, as a side note, I do not support Bob Jones University. It is heinous that they had racially discriminatory policies up until 2000. And so just as a
Yeah, I
side
think
note,
they had. I think
they're
they had. They
despicable, and
were
I
anti. Like they didn't allow interracial dating or marriages up until like the early 2000s or something.
yep,
Um, which
which
I
is
actually
heinous.
I just learned about that recently, actually. But okay, so I'll go next. I kind of have a similar, I guess, but just maybe less specific memory than Catherine on this. I remember reading the textbook and not liking it very much, partly because I didn't care for history at all in at any stage in my education, really. So it was always boring, and I wanted to get through it as fast as I possibly could, so that I could do more interesting things like math. But um, the reading that I did have to do, I remember feeling fundamentally like that textbook it would give the history, but then it would make side comments or claims that just weren't they weren't defended at all. They were just sort of assertions about things that felt like they were really kind of out there or wacko or extreme that um I didn't know how to necessarily argue them because there wasn't any evidence presented, but just, oh, whoa, they said that thing, and that sounds probably like it's not as true as they're saying, or maybe just not true at all. Um, but I don't think I ever brought that to anybody's attention. I think because I just didn't care enough. I think I just read through it and was like, "Oh, let's get through this." Um, I would not use that, definitely not that textbook ever for anything. Um, I don't know if I would. I don't know enough about any of their other curriculum. I probably would just stay away from them in general. I'm sure there's 1,001 other better textbooks for any subject that you could find than them. Um, but yeah, I don't have fond memories of them. And when you layer that on top of the fact that I didn't really care about history too much, there you have it. Everett, you're on mute.
Yeah. So um yeah, but the Bob Jones University. I So yeah, I think as Catherine said, I think for the benefit of the listening audience, yeah, it's probably more famous for than what we're talking about. It is probably more famous for supporting homoracial marriage up until about 2000, and also for losing its federal tax exempt status after some litigation with the IRS. So it is an institution that is famous for things other than what we're talking about. But um, I just BJU is an institution that's devoted to anti-Roman Catholic activism, um, and it does so by um, the the way so many uh, people are bad educators who are also activists do, which is they just intersperse their educational content with just gratuitous comments about stuff that they personally care about, and so yeah, BJU it intersperses its content with uh, anti-Roman Catholic uh, statements of various various kinds, and I'm not.
Which is
Uh,
propaganda.
well,
What you and Jeremy described as propaganda.
I
False,
well,
completely unbacked up, in your face comments.
So honestly, I don't remember a lot of the content of it. I remember um the focusedness of it. Like I just remember thinking, oh, okay, these guys really don't want me to be a Roman Catholic. I remember that. I honestly don't remember as much about what specifically they said. It sounds like you guys have a better memory of that. I remember at one point in one of their history textbooks, they were talking about the celibate uh, the celibate monastic practice within Roman Catholicism, and then there was this little parenthetical aside that says, and but there's nothing in the Bible to justify such a practice, and then it would just continue with whatever it was talking about. So I remember some stuff like that, um, but it was definitely, it was definitely there to um, very very directly spread a particular message. And what I want to emphasize as well in terms of context, and and here I'm going to do my sort of hand dramatizations that won't be in the audio, but like Los Gatos, California is like way over here, and South Carolina is like way over there, and all through the middle are textbook publishers of various types doing various things. And so you have to go a long ways to get out to South Carolina to get to that textbook. But it was you know even Betsy used it, and it was an important, among others. It was probably one of a four-ish major publishers that they used. Um, well, maybe like amongst a half a dozen or so that they use. So it played a prominent role. Like Hake Saxton Math was another. Abeka was another. The Pathway Readers, which is also on the list, was another. Um, so it played a prominent role, and also it is, as far as I know, still today, although or at least it this was the case in 2015. I don't know if it no one's told me that this has changed, but Live Oak Academy does have a formal relationship with BJU up until that point, and as far as I know, that continues. So it is a um it is something that has some prominence. And um yeah, as far as my anti-Roman Catholic upbringing, yeah, BJU definitely, uh, I think, accomplished its goals.
So,
um,
does
yeah,
anybody know, or has anybody asked why BJU textbooks found their way onto the shelves when we were kids?
I
You're
think
mute. You're on mute, Catherine.
I think I may have asked at some point, and I don't remember the answer I got. I was actually I was thinking about this last night, and it could be that there's a smaller market for. Joe mentioned this last night. Is that he was pretty sure that Bob Jones targets textbooks to homeschoolers. So
Hmm.
it could be that there's a much smaller market for books targeted at Christian Protestant homeschoolers, because there are also Catholic homeschoolers out there. I'm sure there's just a different market. And so it could be that maybe there aren't that many Protestant history textbooks out there specifically for homeschoolers. So you know what I mean? Like I don't know. It does not justify it, and the fact that they had racist policies on their books. Well, we may have ordered it after 2000. Still, I don't approve of any relationship
I
with BJU
certainly
whatsoever.
read the book after 2000. I don't know if the book was published after 2000 or not.
But it's still problematic. I'm just saying there may have been a much smaller set of choices for them, and I do at least want to appreciate that it must have been very difficult to select textbooks. Again, not an okay textbook to choose at all, nor an institution that should receive any support. But I just would like to say that.
Yeah,
You know
well,
what I
if
mean?
you're making a conscious decision to select Christian textbooks, and maybe even more specific
Right.
than that, then you're probably going to
Right.
be pretty limited in the books that are available, and
Right.
maybe possibly also the books that are affordable. So
Right.
Well,
there are those things to factor in, but I wouldn't. That being said, I wouldn't necessarily condone the choice.
but let's not beat around the bush on that one. It's not just Christian textbooks; it's Protestant textbooks, and it's because, as Catherine said, and I don't know this specifically, but I would I think I would assume what Catherine just said to be true, that Stephen Betsy could have ordered a Roman Catholic history textbook at that time had they wanted to do so. Like there was a that was available for order somewhere. So options were available.
Right, but I don't know why. I guess not to spark a debate. I don't know why they
Mhm.
would have chosen a Roman Catholic history textbook in the year 2001 or whatever.
Yeah, yeah,
It,
obviously, and I don't want to sort of lead the audience here in the wrong direction. I mean, we're sort of laying the groundwork for some other stuff that probably we're going to discuss later. But um, I I think it is important just to note that, as far as I know, and it sounds like Catherine, you're corroborating this, that there is a Roman Catholic homeschool geared curriculum market out there.
My understanding is that there is. I can confirm that before our next call, but that's my understanding because
Mhm.
that's, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of these history textbooks have other problems. So
Mhm.
it's not like, yeah. But
Another question I
yeah.
have is, and you guys also may not know the answer to this, and I'm also not implying anything by this, but did did either mom or dad ever read that textbook themselves?
I highly doubt it.
Well, um,
I'm just wondering how much they, like, more mom specifically, because mom would have been the one more involved. How much she even knew a lot of the things that were being said. That doesn't
mhm.
say that she's not responsible for it, but I'm just wondering how much she actually knew about it.
So um, what I would say is I don't know specific. I don't know if either Steve or Betsy have ever read a BJU book cover to cover. I don't know the answer to that specific question one way or the other. But what I would say is um, there was a period of time. It was earlier on, and I think this would predate the BJU years, our BJU years, somewhat. But there was a period of time when Betsy held herself out as something of an expert on homeschool curriculum. And I remember at least one occasion where there was a mom who was sort of thinking about homeschooling, came over to the home and sort of toured our bookshelves and got recommendations of, this is a good provider for this kind of thing and for this age, and this is a good text by book provider for math, this is a good text by, right, that sort of a tour of the curriculum that we were using. And so I think there was some sense of like, we it wasn't just like these textbook providers weren't all just sort of popping up out of nowhere. um there was some level of pride in, yeah, we're picking good providers. And of course also Steve, for those who don't know, is a in the audience who don't know, is a retired textbook salesman.
Okay, I see where you're coming from with that. Okay, so do we have any last comments on BJU
Yeah,
textbooks?
I have one. I do want to talk about the 2000 election a little bit because that was in the midst of our BJU reading experience. Um, and for those who don't know here or in the audience, uh, what happened was that the South Carolina primary, which is historically an important early primary, um, occurred in 2000, as it has for other recent years. And George W. Bush, in the run up to the South Carolina primary, went and gave an address to, I guess it was like a school assembly at BJU. And John McCain, who by that stage was his main, it was the race was pretty much down to McCain and Bush at that point. McCain criticized him and made a big deal specifically of saying it is inappropriate for you to have gone to an anti-Roman Catholic establishment without without giving some sort of disclaimer from the lectern while you were there, which is correct. As far as I know, then Governor Bush didn't comment on the issue while he was there. And so McCain attacked him for that. And I was a McCain, so I was too young to vote, but I was a McCain supporter at the time. And Steve, then a month-ish later was the California primary, and Steve voted for Bush. And I distinctly remember one of the reasons he said is that he felt that McCain's conduct with respect to Bush at BJU was unfair, inappropriate. And that was one of the reasons that he was going to go against McCain. And so that was sort of several layers of there's kind of several layers of nuance to that. And so I wouldn't say that was a hugely formative anti-Catholic moment, Roman Catholic moment for me, but I do remember it. And it was something that stood out, that at that time he felt that for a presidential candidate to go to BJU, that there's no that's fine, that's just fine. There is no additional obligation associated with being kind to Roman Catholics associated with that, and to the extent that one is attacked for that, that's an unfair attack. So for what it's again, that's several layers of nuance in there, but I do remember it. I definitely do.
Okay, yeah, I didn't know that. That's a new piece of information for me. Okay. Any other comments from you, Katherine?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. So, since we're running pretty far over the original hope that
Sure.
we would have an hour discussion, that's totally fine. So we covered a lot of good ground today. So we'll discuss offline a potential further episode or whatever you want to call it of this discussion. So yeah, thanks you guys for coming on, and like I said, we'll follow it up afterwards with a discussion about what we want to do going forward, as we still have some other topics. I don't necessarily think it would make sense for us to just completely drop everything and move on. I think there is more to talk about, so we'll discuss that later.
Yeah, and I would just say, I think at this point for the audience, I feel like we're sort of, there's various tips of various icebergs that we're exploring right now, and I think in time more of this will make sense, and I'm comfortable with that. But just I think there's more connection to things than we can all articulate in the first go. And Jeremy, I'd also say, I know, I suspect you can't do it for copyright reasons, but it would be sort of funny if for the static image for this episode, you use the guy with the gut hanging out over the bar.
Yeah, I can. Yeah. Well, I've been I had a couple issues with YouTube because I played a sound clip from from a song a couple of times for my podcast, and I had it delisted, which is normal. That YouTube's very harsh about that kind of stuff. Okay, so thanks a lot. we'll go ahead and wrap up now, and I guess we'll see you guys next time. Thank you.
Sounds good.
All right.